No reporting in progress. None. No. Very.
Where does he live?
He lives with the Dalai Lama in Dharamsala.
Oh,
Oh my God. I can't stop recording. End meeting. Leave me. Give me feedback. You all. Why isn't more coming up? Why don't you do this? Why don't we stop the recording?
Putting my personal email address in the chat. If you haven't already emailed, if there's a let's say if you have attended most of the classes, um, then you should get a completion certificate from FPMT for this module of the basic program. So just send me an email saying I'm trying to compile a list of the folks who have attended the majority of the classes so that they can get a completion certificate. So so if you haven't, if I didn't have your email and couldn't reach out to you, or if you um, here's my email address. So just send me a quick email and I'll put you on that list, and then make sure you get a completion certificate for this module, the basic program. And also, last time I wasn't sure, but as I prepared for today's class, it became clear we'll need one more. This won't be the last class. There'll be one, the one that's already scheduled. We'll do that one. There's no way for everything today. It's still in the text, so that's good. And also, and Jan said some folks were emailing, but if you have preferences or feelings about the next set of classes, then tell Jan. And the options were Shantideva's Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, or a short class on death, intermediate state, and rebirth, or the fourth chapter of the Ornament of Clear Realizations by Maitreya. And eventually, plan would be, I guess, because we're trying to do the whole basic program. So if there are people interested, we'll do all three eventually. And then after those, there are two modules on Tantra, but those require high yoga Tantra empowerment. So those are last. If there are people interested. Okay, right. We'll start with just a little, again, like we have been, with a little bit of a contemplation. But today, I'm not going to, I don't know if you were connected to it, but in the past, a number of times, I've been particularly focusing on one verse or something or two from previous class. Today, I'm going to just focus. I want to try something related to actually, we're covering chapter 1 in this set of classes, and I'm going to summarize the other chapters. But the final chapter in the text is chapter 5, which is the benefits of studying this text. But yeah, chapter 5 discusses like the benefits of studying the text. So I just wanted to do like something a little bit just to see kind of how it feels to people. So again, there are like what, 7 Vajra topics, and we've been covering the topic of in the text, and we've been covering the topic mainly lately of Buddha nature, right? Tathagata Garbha, Buddha essence. Um, and so I want to just sort of sit with and try something for a moment. Is in the final chapter of this text by Maitreya, Maitreya talks about the benefits of studying and thinking about these topics. And I'm gonna let's just start. So here's what I want to try is apply this verse. I'm going to start with one verse. I want to ask you just to apply it to yourself and to notice what comes up. Because all of us have studied at least a few words of this text, more than that actually. Not the whole text, because it's 5 chapters, but we've all studied some of it. And so Maitreya says, he says, I'm not gonna use his words, I'm gonna elaborate for a second, right? So he said basically saying, imagine someone who wants to achieve enlightenment. So imagine a person who's striving for enlightenment, uh, who says turns to the kings of the Dharma, right? So that can mean the Buddhas or great bodhisattvas, and he offers them fields of gold adorned with jewels, equal in number to the atoms of all the pure lands of the Buddhas. So what you're imagining here, right, is like whole planets, right, or like humongous fields of gold, right, and inconceivable amounts, right, of like wealth, jewels. In our world, right, in the worldly sense, people focus a lot on wealth. So here he's saying, imagine that you like somehow amassed like inconceivable, humongous, like you know, just you know, like sort of billionaires here, trillionaire, whatever. Imagine humongous amounts of wealth and offering it to the Buddhas. And then he says, that there would be a great good karma in that. Right? That person would cultivate a lot of good karma. And then he says, on the other hand, someone who hears one word of this text, and upon hearing it becomes filled with one feeling of devotion, one moment of devotion. That's you in this contemplation, right? If you had one moment of feeling, wow, I'd like to achieve Buddhahood. Wow, maybe I have Buddha nature. I want to achieve that. So you felt one moment of just feeling some enthusiasm to like awaken your Buddha nature. So Maitreya says, your merits are far greater than the other person. Like, so if you had one moment, right, while studying, say, this teaching on the three jewels or on Buddha nature, and you felt some sense of faith or devotion or enthusiasm, Maitreya is saying your merit is greater than if some other person who is striving for enlightenment, had filled like huge fields, piles, humongous amounts of jewels, gold, billions of dollars. If they had offered that to Buddhas, your merit's greater. So sit with that just for a moment, and how do you actually feel? What's your reaction internally to contemplating that? Try to just notice. If you try to I can even imagine, right? If you imagine somebody gave, say, $2 or $3 million, and you had faith for one moment in the teachings of Maitreya, okay, your merit's greater from that one moment. And then he's not talking about 1 or 2 or $5 million. He's talking about like the earth, all the wealth on the earth, all, and then imagine like a similar amount of wealth on Mars, Venus, and then all the planets in this galaxy, the Milky Way galaxy, right? And then all the planets in numerous galaxies, right, filled with wealth and offered. Your merit's more. Saying you have like a car now. Not only do you have Buddha nature, but you have this force of karma. That's what good karma is, right? Merit. Is you have a kind of force of good karma. And then he gives another verse, similar but on a different topic. He says, now also imagine an intelligent person who's striving for enlightenment. And then think about how hard it is to be ethical, like to not tell small lies or big lies, to not retaliate when somebody tries to harm you, to be honest, to have character, even when other people are cheating, to not cheat, even when other people are lying, to tell the truth. Right? Okay. Um, to not do even small unethical things. And then he says, so now imagine somebody who guards their morality flawlessly without making efforts for not just for a day, not just for 2 days, not even just for this life, but for life after life, for eons time, which is much harder, by the way, than generosity. And then Maitreya says, but you hearing one word, this text, and upon hearing it becoming filled with a feeling of devotion or faith or like aspiration to practice, your merit's greater than someone who's ethical for eons. Again, just notice what comes up as you just contemplate that. This is to be applied to oneself. Then he gives one more verse, this kind of topic, where he says, then also imagine someone who went in a meditation retreat and achieved calm abiding, shamatha, to the point where they not only achieve shamatha, but then they can enter the different form realm absorptions, all the way up to the absorption in the realm of Brahma. so a divine realm, so they could achieve those different kinds of very subtle mental states, very subtle meditative concentrations. Yeah, and they could achieve all the four different form realm absorptions. They could suppress all of their mental afflictions and enter those kinds of very peaceful, blissful states of meditation. And then they even use those um, to try to practice the path to enlightenment. Maitreya says, but if you studied even one line, one verse, one word from this text, and upon hearing it develop devotion, your merit is greater than even that. Greater than like doing years of meditation retreat successfully, actually, right? In the sense of developing those kinds of concentration. And then Maitreya says, so why is this so? And Maitreya points out, he says, the karma of generosity just results in wealth. It only yields wealth. The karma of morality or ethics only leads to good rebirths, mainly leads to good rebirths. And the karma of meditative concentration mainly leads to suppressing the mental afflictions temporarily. But wisdom permanently abandons all the mental afflictions and their imprints, all the obscurations. So wisdom is supreme. And Maitreya says, and its cause is studying these seven Vajra topics. So what Maitreya is saying there is that, by studying these topics, you yourself, not only now do you have Buddha nature, but you have a unique kind of karmic seed, a unique kind of karmic imprint. You're like that person, who had the gold hidden under their floor, but now you've been told. Now you know where it is. And due to that moment of devotion, you'll begin a process of gradually digging it up. And through that, you'll become a Buddha. The idea here is that we just take a moment to develop some enthusiasm or some feeling of um, like I have some kind of good fortune. I have Buddha nature, and now I've been pointed out. It's been pointed out to me, and I have this kind of karmic seed of virtue. Others haven't had they have Buddha nature, but they haven't maybe had the good fortune of having a chance to create that kind of karma, a connection to wisdom, right? Because the Buddha nature is awakened through our connection with the activities of those who have already achieved enlightenment, like the Buddha and Maitreya. So now my task is to awaken my Buddha nature, right? To uncover it in order to benefit others and also myself. That's what that kind of motivational that works. I will just recite once the verse, refuge Bodhicitta. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. through the merits of giving or generosity and the other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentients. So those verses are kind of radical, right? I think. We usually think like, oh, somebody gave $1 million or something, that's like a big deal. He's Maitreya saying, it's like nothing. It doesn't matter. Like, and it's actually, I'm just pointing out, like, one is it's interesting to contemplate, but the other is like, I'm just going to make a quick side point. Like, do you get the emphasis on wisdom? That wisdom is what's important there. And we'll say that more about this later, but compassion, is an aspect, it's connected to wisdom, right? So those two. The things we often, what Maitreya here is suggesting is that some of the things we often in our world focus on are not so important. Wisdom is more important than those, is what Maitreya is suggesting. Well, I'll return to the text where we left off. So we're up to near the end here. It says the consciousness that perceives the basic element. So first he says the ultimate essence of the self arisen is to be realized through faith. Just as when the sun shines, those who are blind will not see it. So what he's getting at there is first of all, we're included in those who are blind. When he says the blind will not, the sun's shining brightly, but the person who's blind won't see it. He's referring to people, including us. And what he's getting at is that where he says the ultimate essence, meaning the Buddha nature or the ultimate nature of your own mind, is to be realized through faith. What they're actually saying is is that those with sharp faculty and great merit actually don't realize it through faith. They understand it through their own realization, through their own experience. So there's those who've actually realized the nature of mind directly. It would say they don't have to rely on faith because they know it from their own inner experience of meditation. But he's saying if you don't have that capacity yet, because we're not there yet, then he says then you have to rely on faith. If that makes sense. So he's saying like you don't have another choice yet. And in the commentary they explain, they say there's a sense that they call it sometimes sharp faculty disciples and then dull faculty disciples. Sometimes I was studying this with my friend, we were joking like, well, you're the sharp faculty, but in this sense, I think it's rare to find somebody who's sharp faculty in this sense, right? Sharp faculty doesn't mean being smart or something. It means being able to see the nature of your own mind in meditation. So then in the commentary, they say there are 4 kinds of dull faculty disciples who have to rely on faith. The lowest of them all are those who have not seen emptiness directly at all. So maybe like us. The next above that are bodhisattvas who are newly on the path, like early phase in the practice bodhisattvas. And then arhats and pratyeka buddhas. So they're people who have achieved liberation even, but they haven't they haven't realized their Buddha nature. They haven't awakened their Buddha nature in the sense that they don't have great compassion. You have to have, great compassion is part of the process of uncovering your Buddha nature. So he's saying for those kind of people, we're blind. And so it's actually getting at a similar point to what we were getting at earlier. So we have to study, and think about our own Buddha nature because we haven't seen it yet directly. It's still buried under the earth in that one simile. And so somebody has to point it out to us, which is what this text does, and then you have to do a process of uncovering it, right, in order to then see it. And then eventually you'll become a sharp faculty disciple who's seen it by uncovering your Buddha nature. So he's saying that's the process in a sense, is it starts with a sense of faith. And then he says, identifying the nature of the basic element. So identifying Buddha nature. And he says something, kind of beautiful verse here. Says, I'll just read the whole verse and I'll go over it. There is nothing to be removed. There's not the slightest to be added. Reality is to be seen as reality. Upon seeing it, you are liberated. So he's talking there about the ultimate nature of phenomena, including your own mind. And where he says there is nothing to be removed, right? This is, remember at the very, I don't know if those of you who've been along, at the very beginning of the text, he made this point. He said, why is this called Vodger topics? Because it's difficult. And then one of the points he made, he said, why is it difficult to understand? And he said, because, uh, it's already pure, but it has to be purified. There's nothing to be removed, but you have to remove your mental afflictions. And he said that can be hard to understand. Maitreya said that at the beginning. So here he is at the end of the chapter saying, again, there's nothing to be removed. And what that line means, the reference to that, is that we grasp at thing that ourself as a person, for example, as though we existed inherently, independently, intrinsically. And we grasp with the mind, right? And actually, you can feel that if you actually check, like, when you, um, I mean, they often start, you can do this with perceiving anything, but they often, at the beginning in the teachings, they often point out, think about a time when okay, I'll say it this way. Imagine you didn't do anything wrong, right? Like, so you didn't do anything wrong on a certain day. And then somebody comes and you hear that, they come up to you and looking at you with a kind of upset face, and they say, you cheated on this. And you're a thief, say at school or at your job or at your whatever, some store or somewhere, right? There would be a feeling that would arise, um, of a very concrete sense of I, right? You would feel I'm being falsely accused. And it would be a kind of very agitated feeling. Me, it would rise in my chest, I think. Some people it would rise here, or some people in their gut, but you would have a very strong feeling. And what this verse is getting at, that line is getting at, is that's grasping at an intrinsically existent self. And what he's saying is there's nothing to be removed because that self doesn't exist to start with. It never existed. And that's why we said we're blind, or we're like someone who's hallucinating, actually. We hallucinate that. And he's not saying you don't exist. You do exist, but not in that way. And actually, they have many teachings on this, right? If you were to search, so for me, it would rise my chest, right? If somebody accused me falsely, I would feel, I didn't do that. I'll be spontaneous in that moment without a second, without even a second of hesitation. That feeling would arise. In Buddhism, there are many, if you study with lamas, you know this, right? Like they'll say, okay, well then search your chest. Where is that eye? Is it is it in this rib or that rib? Is it in one of the ventricles of your heart? Is it in your aorta? The aorta is made of a bunch of cells. Is it one of those cells? Well, it's not in your body. If you checked all the parts of, all those parts of the body in your chest, you wouldn't find something there. When they did an autopsy, they would say, oh, here, I found the essence of this person, right? And then you can go through all your aggregates, right? So parts of your mind, right? Like there's a feeling that arises, an unpleasant feeling. So is that feeling of unpleasantness the real you? No, it's just a feeling, right? There's sound consciousness and ear consciousness, hearing a voice. Is that the real you? Is the ear lobe or the eardrum you? You can search all the parts, both the mental parts and the physical parts, and you won't find that intrinsically existent you. And then what they say actually in the Madhyamaka school, which this text follows, is that there is a you. It's based on just a mere appearance, right? There's a mere appearance and a mere label, me. So you exist as merely labeled, they say, right, based on an appearance. So there's a basis, which is an appearance, in that case of it, in that moment, certain body and mind. And then you label I on that. So you do exist in that way, but there's no intrinsically existing you. So when it says there's nothing to be removed, what they're saying is there never was an intrinsically existent person. There never was an intrinsic existent. So in that sense, there's nothing to be removed. And it's kind of like that. Actually, if a person hallucinated something, and then they got treatment and they stopped hallucinating, in one sense there was something removed, hallucination. But what was hallucinated never existed. So the thing that they were thinking was there wasn't removed because it never existed in the first place. It's like that. Then where it says there's nothing in the slightest to be added. What that's getting at is that the true nature of things, emptiness, existed all along. That always was the nature of it. So when you realize it, you're not adding something new to it. You get what I mean? Like, whereas when you realize the ultimate nature of your own mind, you're not adding some new nature to it. The nature of your mind always was what you realized at that time. It's just you hadn't seen it. That's the meaning of that line. Then it says, reality is to be seen as reality. So that's the point. Is the goal of seeing Buddha nature is seeing things as they are. And upon seeing that, you are liberated. And that's kind of that's sort of in some ways, that's the core message in some ways, or one of the core messages of Buddhism, is that the wisdom that sees reality as it is liberating. And anything else is not liberating in the end. It can be liberating temporarily. But the only thing that is genuinely liberating or permanently liberating or truly liberating is oneself seeing reality as it is.
Clarify a word.
Sure.
Reality and realization. What would that be? I mean, how that's been translated from the Sanskrit or from the Tibetan?
Yeah, sometimes they get it like the nature of like what they're getting at there, because in this context, what they're actually getting at is actually you can say it in two different ways. I mean, I'll elaborate a little. Like what they're getting at is the ultimate nature of phenomena. So reality in the sense of the ultimate truth, the ultimate nature of things. And part of that is that part of what's being gotten at there, which I always find disturbing personally, is say it that way, is we who are not Aryas, who haven't seen emptiness directly, like we see conventional phenomena and they do have a conventional reality. But that reality, they always say, always conceals something deeper, always has an element of they call it a truth for a concealer. It conceals something. So there's a sense of it's not the final reality of that phenomena, because there's always an element of, what's the word? You could say we're not always grasping at things as though they intrinsically exist, but they always appear to us as if they intrinsically exist. So there's always an element of inaccuracy in that sense. We're not seeing the actual ultimate nature of that phenomena. So we don't actually see reality in the sense of the ultimate nature until we see the final nature of that thing, until we see emptiness. So that's what's being gotten at here, really.
So you have to see the final nature. I mean, have that experience first, and then kind of like it opens up being able. So it's beyond perception. Yeah. I mean, I always think of these things as, the emptiness. Is it something I perceive, or is that something that's just? These are big questions.
In the end, it is something. I mean, would say you perceive it, but I guess there are different levels of perceiving emptiness.
Right. Okay. So really.
there's a conceptual level of it, but that's not
Yeah.
what's being referred to here. What's being referred to here is the
Right.
direct.
That's what I'm trying to understand, I guess.
And one point they make is that they call it, when on the path of seeing, they say there's the direct perception of emptiness. So it is a perception. But then they make a point that while you're perceiving emptiness, there's not, your subjective experience doesn't have the duality of subject and object. So there is a perception happening, but there's not that dualistic sense of I and
And that.
and that. They say it's like
Okay.
water poured into water is the traditional metaphor they use. Experientially, it's like having water poured into water. You can't tell you can't differentiate. If you took two glasses of pure water and you poured them together, you can never tell which came from which glass. The experience, they say, is like that.
So they're not perceived in a manner with any of our senses. It's nothing perceived in a manner in which we are accustomed to perceiving.
Yeah.
Okay, that helps.
And then he says, the basic element is empty of adventitious defilements, which are separable in character. It is not empty of the unsurpassable qualities, which are inseparable character. And one way of contemplating that verse, this next verse, is the adventitious defilement. I've used this metaphor before, that the adventitious defilements you can think of as are clouds, and the basic nature is the sky. Right? They're separable in that sense. They're not in the nature of the sky. It's one point for space. But here, part of what's being gotten at is that because he just mentioned reality, through seeing reality, you're liberated. And part of that, what's being gotten at here, is that the mental afflictions, right? The adventitious defilements, that means the mental afflictions and their imprints, are incompatible with and refuted by the wisdom that understands emptiness. Because when you see, and part of that is if you think about the different mental afflictions, they exaggerate. Like, so for example, if somebody feels, if you feel hatred, you're exaggerating the negative qualities of that person. You're actually exaggerating the sense of dualism, right? You're feeling I'm intrinsically other than that person. That person's bad and I'm good, and they're like this and they're like that, right? There are all these elaborations that are false, actually. They're not real. So if you see reality, which is the nature of the basic element, those fall away because they're like something that's based on truth. So if you see the truth, it destroys and undermines those mental afflictions. Same with like craving, for example. When we're craving for something, right? We're exaggerating its good quality. We're feeling like, oh, if I have that, then I'll have this, and then it'll be like that. And we're making up a story that exaggerates. And if you stop that exaggeration, doesn't mean you can't enjoy things, but you don't crave after them. Craving, by its nature, includes this element of exaggeration, really. It's like addiction. Addiction involves exaggeration. Pride involves exaggeration by nature, right? You're exaggerating your own good qualities in that sense. Or sometimes we're exaggerating them negatively. They're negative pride. Feeling bad about yourself, too bad. Or most of the prides are positive, but exaggerating too much. So my point is that the basic element is empty of the adventitious defilements, is getting at, on the one hand, because it's an emptiness, you don't experience them while you're experiencing it, but also because perceiving the basic element is perceiving reality, it undermines anything that's based on illusion or based on ignorance or based on exaggeration. So they're separable in character in the sense that they're based on a kind of flimsy illusion. Then he says, but it's not empty of the unsurpassable qualities, which are of inseparable character. I think one thing that's worth contemplating there is that what that's getting at in a way is that the best, most wonderful qualities we as people can develop are grounded in reality. And I'll give an example. Compassion. Like compassion that recognizes that others suffer, that others don't want to suffer, yet they suffer, is true, actually. And that's not an exaggeration, right? And that their suffering really hurts them is not an exaggeration, right? And even if their suffering is based on a kind of, in some cases, a mistaken notion about reality, seeing that they're caught up in that, seeing that a person's caught up in that and is suffering is true, actually. So wisdom doesn't undermine that. It actually, and there's they say sometimes, wisdom, wisdom is the womb of compassion, actually. In other words, that by cultivating wisdom, it's actually easier to develop compassion because they're compatible states. Because actually, if you understand, wisdom understands the cause of suffering, and then you see that somebody else, what's the word, is caught up in the cause of suffering and is therefore suffering, you actually feel a sense of empathy and want to free them from that. So that's what I mean, where it says it's not empty of the unsurpassable qualities. One way of contemplating that is that if you cultivate wisdom, understanding the basic element or understanding your own, the nature of your own mind, good quality, like love, wishing others to be happy. Well, others want to be happy, right? And you see that accurately, and you feel, well, I wish they could have that. And you understand I'm connected to them, right? Because part of the wisdom understanding the nature of reality is that we're all interdependent. As you understand, they're interdependent with each other, they're interdependent with me, I'm interdependent with them. We're all inextricably throughout time connected to each other. And their well-being and my well-being are not separate. And so you want them to be happy. So part of the idea here is that if you understand the nature of reality, it doesn't undermine the good qualities. And I've said before, like wisdom gives rise to joy, to bliss. So bliss is part of that. So part of the point here is that that's what it means here. So it just says it right. So the basic element is empty of the adventitious defilements. Adventitious means temporary, right? They arose due to some causes and conditions, and they can be gotten rid of. They can be eliminated from that because they're not in the nature of it. And then he's saying, but um, but wisdom doesn't undermine good qualities because wisdom's conducive to good qualities, like generosity, like ethics, and so on. So that's the meaning of that verse, I think. And then it says, then Maitreya says, another section, he says, the purpose of teaching that sentient beings possess this basic element. So he's saying, like, why did I teach that? Why did the Buddha teach? Maitreya taught it based on the teachings of the Buddha. So he says, why is that taught? And then he says, and it's funny, the heading says argument, or debate point. So it says, like cloud, dreams, and illusions, all objects of knowledge in every way are said to be empty. Why then do the conquerors say that sentient beings have Buddha essence? That's actually kind of a summary. So maybe actually, he explains the clouds, dreams, and so on below. So I'm not going to explain. He gets at what each of those metaphors is getting at in a minute. But what he's getting at there is this: the question he's raising, though. I'll just mention it that way. The question he's raising here is, okay, so if the nature of things is that they lack inherent existence or independent existence, intrinsic nature, then why do I call it Buddha nature? Right? Why can't I just say it's emptiness? Why am I calling it Buddha nature? Why am I explaining it as Buddha nature? What is there some purpose to because there are other sutras, the Perfection of Wisdom sutras simply say, the Heart Sutra says there is no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, and so on, that are just teaching just emptiness, right? They're teaching it explicitly. It says the Bodhisattva is contemplating also the emptiness of the five aggregates, right? He teaches it quite explicitly. So he says, why here in this teaching, right, which is the third turning of the wheel of Dharma, teaching on the Tathagata teaching on Buddha nature. He says, why use those terms? Right? Why use this term Buddha nature? Why use the terms basic element? And he gives 5 reasons. He says this was taught to those who have the 5 faults. having a discouraged mind, looking down on others, apprehension of the unreal, deprecating the real Dharma, and self-cherishing in order to dispel those five. So he says there are five reasons why this is taught. So we'll go through now. We'll explain it. I'll follow it as he explains it. He says, the mental afflictions are said to be similar to clouds. So there he's going back to the beginning, that first verse, right? He says, so it said like a cloud, right? So the mental afflictions are similar to clouds in the sense that as I just mentioned, right? Clouds arise due to causes and conditions, right? The planet is evaporation of water molecules, right? Go up in the sky and aggregate, and the cloud forms, right? So there are 2 points here. One is clouds arise due to causes and conditions, and they're not in the nature of space. They're not in the nature of that space, right? And so he's saying, you get the simile here, right? So he's a metaphor. He's saying afflictions are like clouds in that sense, that they arose due to causing conditions and they're not in the nature of things. Just so your mental afflictions arise in the space of your mind, but they're not in the nature of it. They just arose due to causing conditions. Then he says, karma is like the enjoyments in a dream. And that's an interesting metaphor, right? Your karma is like the enjoyments in a dream. The meaning there is that it's interesting, isn't it? Because all Buddhist schools agree karma function. Karma means action, cause and effect, function. But here where it says the karma is like the enjoyments in a dream, what it's getting at is that it's interesting, isn't it? If you have if you have a really enjoyable dream, you actually enjoy the experience, right? Like so if you dream of being in some beautiful place in nature, for example, you feel enjoyment. Or if you dream of seeing somebody you haven't seen in a long time, right? Suddenly you see them and you're someplace together, you feel happy, right? Yet they're not there, right? Or if you dream of being at the Grand Canyon, you're not actually at the Grand Canyon, right? But you dreamt of it and it felt fun to see it. If you dreamt of seeing your old friend, you feel totally happy with them. Even sometimes when you first wake up, right, you still feel happy. Oh wow, I saw so and so. It was so great to see them. But you didn't actually see them, right? And what this is getting at is karma is like that in the sense that karma cause and effect really does give rise to experiences of happiness and suffering, right? Well-being and of suffering. Yet things don't exist in the way they appear to us, even as we're experiencing them. We grasp at it as though it were intrinsically existent, but it doesn't exist the way it appears. So this is a simile for that. So the the manifest state of our karma really does inextricably, you can't. It really does cause suffering. It really does cause happiness, but it doesn't exist the way it appears, like in a dream. In the book of Kadam, there's a beautiful long simile or story that used where I think it's Atisha tells a story of the person who has some of those people have those extremely elaborate dreams where somebody felt like they lived a whole life, and they had children and the children died and they got married and their spouse passed away and they almost drowned. It was like a long story, they had it very elaborate. And then they woke up and they felt like they had lived a whole life, but then they woke and were like, oh, it's just a dream. And part of the simile there is, that again, so the experiences of suffering and happiness really do happen, right? And at the same time, it's quite similar, isn't it? When you look back, they sometimes say, as somebody's dying, they look back, after you've died, for example, you look back at your life and it's like a dream. Actually, it's already happened for me. I don't know. I look back at some times in my life and I go, did that really I remember doing that. I remember thinking that, somebody said, "Oh, you want to go back?" A friend of mine from college said, "Do you want to go back and visit where we went to school?" And I was like, if I went back there, there's nothing there actually. There was all the people. I'm old enough now. All the professors I studied with are left. They're not there anymore. Most of them, some died. Most of them retired. The people I knew aren't. So I was like, I wouldn't even remember which house this person lived in. My point is, it's like a dream, like, that, so, and yet those experiences happened and led to happiness and suffering at the time, and have effects down the road, but they don't exist substantially. They're not graspable. They're not findable. Ultimately, you can't find an experience, right? You could experience an experience, but you can't find an essence to it. And then it says the aggregates, which are the fruitions of karma and afflictions, are likened to a magical manifestation in an illusion. And again, illusion is always means in this sense that and by the way, so the aggregates mean your own body and mind, right? So your own body and mind arose due to mental, what is here? So your own body and mind, your aggregates, are the fruitions of, means they arose due to your past karma and mental affliction. That was the cause of your taking rebirth, according to Buddhism. And then it says, so they're likened to magical manifestations in an illusion. And again, the part of the thing with the magical manifestations is one point is they appear one way but don't exist that way. And they often use in Buddhism, there's a sutra that teaches this. There's a famous story of an example, of a magician who puts on an illusion. And then they say, like, so the magician creates a kind of an illusion of they use different things, like illusory people or illusory horses or something, but so, but there are all kinds of illusions magicians create, right? Anyway, go into detail. But the point is, to the audience, it appears as if it's actually happening, right? They gasp. Oh, if like the person gets sawed in half or some whatever, some kind of thing that seems like somebody got killed or something happened, the audience will gasp, right? Because to the audience, it seems like it's actually happening. The magician they make the point that the magician, it appears as if it's happening, but the magician knows it's an illusion. And then if there was somebody like behind watching the whole process, they wouldn't even see, if they're sort of came late and they're seeing the whole trick as a trick, it wouldn't even appear that way. And we're like and I'm not going to go into too much detail. That gets at different kinds of beings, but the main point here is we're like the audience. That these things appear, and we grasp and we sigh and we do whatever, we react as if it were actually happening, but it's not happening in the way it seems.
I'm getting an image of like an infant, what we do when they're little beings, how we introduce them to sounds and sights, and they're the audience actually, and they're absorbing into it. It's a little bit like, I'm just thinking, how do we get, I know it's karma, I know the intellectual thing, but really emotionally, how do we absorb this stuff?
Which stuff?
Just the conventional stuff that, because it's like, I remember the first kind of hallucination, if you like, I had, and I was little. I could have been more than a year and a half or two. And I looked on my windowsill and I could see something. I had no idea what, right? Trying to make sense of it, but I remember the moment that I saw it. And where is it? I mean, that's just that just emerges out of the. Does it make sense? Well, just think about it. It just came up. So,
Because part of, I think, what's being gotten at here is, I mean, I think it's getting at what you're getting at, which is once you have, right, so the karma, like you have karma, from past life, you have karma, you have mental afflictions, they lead to a rebirth. And then you have these aggregates, right? Which have sense powers and senses. So you have eyes, you have ears, you have nose, and tactile and so on. And then this is part of what's being gotten at here, I think, is then without a choice, right, you're going to perceive all kinds of things, right? So appearances are going to rise to your eye consciousness, and sounds are going to rise to your ear consciousness. And part of what happens then, though, is that because we haven't realized the ultimate nature of phenomena, and we're in samsara, right? Then what happens actually is that this is what's being gotten at here, really, is that we, actually right away, right, there's a duality. If you think of a baby, right away, there's a duality of like, usually it starts with mom, usually, not most often, right? Mom and me. So there's a sense of I and a sense of other. And then uh that's the first wanting, right? Is like, I want mom. And then the first upset, right? The baby's crying and agitated, is like, I'm not getting what I want, right? Um, and that's the normal process in human realm of the beginnings of. So you're grasping, and it's not, and part of the point here is, it's not, what I'm noting is,
Yeah.
it's not verbal in that sense of like, we're not saying, oh, hi, my name's so-and-so, and you're my mom. You can't speak yet. But already there's what they call the innate grasping. It's innate to us in the sense that it's there while we're in the womb, actually. That there's an innate sense of I and other. And once you have that innate sense of I and other, you start having wanting some things and not wanting others. That's the most basic component. And then as you start to develop, as you get a little older, you're starting to perceive different things, right? And you're trying to get a sense, right? And babies want to grab something, and then they either, if they like it, they want to put it in their mouth, usually. If they don't like it, they're going to start crying. And pushing away or crying or screaming or something. And that's the very beginning, right, of attachment and aversion in this life, the beginning of it in this lifetime. And then it gets more and more, as you get older, it gets more and more elaborated in different ways.
It's very interesting. Okay, thank you, Don.
Yes.
Really helpful.
And then Lisa has.
So basically, if I'm hearing you say, it's this mushy stuff that's inside of our head called our brains. Like developing the dendrites, and it's kind of in a predictable pattern that's leading us astray.
Well, at one point, the way Buddhism, I think, presents it is, well, a few points. One is, of course, you're right. Once we're in a human body, it's largely, she was asking if it's in our brain. Once you're in a human body, it's largely in your brain, but it's not only in your brain, in the sense that, we have nerves in other parts of our bodies, and we start to have, for example, you get a gut feel, like there's now good evidence about like the brain gut connection, and you start to have. That's true. Yeah. And one point I guess I'll make is that one point I was making is, it's not only the brain, it's our whole body to some extent, but mainly the brain, where that's all held, or developed in the human body. But what Buddhism is asserting, in part, is that these patterns go back to before you had this brain and will continue on after you have this brain, is one point. And that whatever your karmic tendencies are will, I guess, actually partly determine what kind of brain you get, but also determine what you develop, like, say, right. So like, for example, well, actually, that's true, isn't it? You can change your karma, and also you can change your brain. It's actually true. So for example, like if a person, like if a person, for example, repeatedly gets in the habit of anger, they're changing their brain, and if somebody else meditates, they're changing their brain. There's good scientific research saying both of those things are true. So one point is, yeah, I mean, our karma determines what body we take rebirth in, but also determines what we do with that brain as part of our body. But yeah, but there is another point in Buddhism, which is that the awareness, started before you had that brain and continues after. So it's not dependent, it's while you're alive, it's dependent upon, it's interdependent with your brain, but it's not, the consciousness itself is not dependent on the brain in that sense. And that's why also there are, like, there are even teachings in Buddhism about, like, well, like, for example, like when somebody achieves calm abiding and they enter the form realm, the formless realms, that's not connected to the brain at that point, because their awareness is still connected to that body, but isn't any longer in that moment, isn't functioning in the body, say. So there are states in Buddhism where a person's awareness, for us who don't have combining, while we're alive, we're kind of we're pretty limited by our experience.
Handicap.
Yep. And it's not just our biggest handicap; it's also our biggest opportunity. Because it's very, according to Buddhism, also the teaching on precious human rebirth make this point. It's really hard to get a human brain, and it's a uniquely wonderful karma. And if you compare it, for example, to the nervous system of an insect, you have a lot more opportunity to develop empathy. And part of it is like because we're mammals and born from a mother, there's a natural tendency in our brains to have compassion and empathy. That's evolutionarily, all mammals share actually some connection to some capacity for affection. Cats are affectionate, dogs are affectionate, bears are affectionate. All the animals, all mammals have a capacity. So, anyway, human body, and then the human brain, of course, has enough intelligence that if you're interested in something like emptiness, you can understand it. You can start to understand it. You can contemplate it. So there are unique benefits to having a human brain, according to, if you want to practice the path. But it is an important point that Buddhism and the teachings on Buddha nature is saying, but it's an important point that awareness while you're in this body and so on is very interconnected with the brain, but that it's not identical to the brain. It's a separate, the brain is a physical phenomenon, awareness is a mental phenomenon, that they're not identical. It's an important point. Yep.
I know some other, I don't know if it'd be things, but things that when, and I've observed this in my own daughter, but when they're very small, they have premonitions and understandings that adults, they see angels, my daughter saw angels, and was very connected at this ranch to the meditation, to the son of the people that owned it who died working with Native Americans in South America. But so the one theory is that it gets covered over as you become an adult or as you grow up by all the afflictions. But when you're just born and you're quite young, you don't have those because you haven't. It's sort of like you haven't ruined your immune system. It's sort of like your immune system. So is there any thinking that when you just, I'm talking about 2, 3, very young ages, that they haven't developed mental afflictions the way we have?
I think at least my impression, which I'm not an expert on this topic really, but my impression, because she was asking about young children who can kind of have a sense of things that adults can't, is that first of all, not all young children will have the same capacities, and that my impression is that sometimes in Buddhism I've heard examples where that's connected. People talk about it as being connected to whatever that child did or was in their past life. So there is like that different kids will have different connections, and then those, of course, the conditioning of this life can cover over that, and can sort of then you start to get more habituated to whatever is going on in this life. But that, so like, and that but that there are these sort of inclinations from past lives is the idea. So somebody who has a connection to one kind of tradition or one kind of being or one kind of seeing, and then but then as you get more, and that's why like a lot of times, even actually Tibetan Buddhists have tons of this example, but even there's scientific research showing that like young kids can sometimes remember their past lives, and that happens spontaneously now. They've had the researchers at University of Virginia have done a lot of studies on that. That fits with what Tibetan teachers do, but it fades. Yeah,
it fades, right? And it's like when you say someone is an old soul.
Yeah.
Usually they have children.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that seems to be the idea, is that it's connected to past life.
Or just access to a place. I remember being younger and having sort of like access more in my dreams than awake, but also awake, but access to a place, um, I can't describe that there was knowledge there and, that, that the older I got, the less access I had.
Mm.
Until I, was alone anymore.
Hope you regain it.
Or it's the connection to past lives. Yeah, it could be.
Could
It was like dreaming of things that hadn't happened yet. So it was a time that a place that had no obstructions at all. It was a very, clear place. Wasn't constrained by time and objects and people and, although people were, sort of were there, you could see things, but they hadn't happened yet. And, a premonition that something was gonna happen. I mean, they call it a premonition, but I just it didn't feel like a premonition. It felt like a knowledge of something.
Hmm. Interesting. That's cool. Mhm. Yeah, I would, a lot of times, anyway, I mean, I wonder if you, anyway. Sure. But, so then I'll just continue on a little bit, because we have self-time. And so he says, having expounded beforehand in this way, and again in this Uttara Tantra, it is presented that the basic element exists in order to abandon 5 faults. So I'd mentioned them, but now he elaborates on them. And so he says, says the first is, not having heard about this, some, due to the fault of self-contempt, stemming from a discouraged mind, do not generate bodhicitta. So what's being gotten at there is, in a sense, that one of the reasons, right, he's saying, why did I explain emptiness using this term or this idea of Buddha nature? Why does the Buddha do that? And one is, he's saying self-contempt or a discouraged mind or low self-esteem or lack of confidence is a problem, right? And that and he's saying it's an obstacle to developing here bodhicitta, compassion, love, believing you can become enlightened. And actually, doesn't it? It's true, isn't it? It requires what an amazing idea, right? I can become an infinite being, a Buddha, a being of infinite wisdom, infinite love, infinite compassion. And so he's saying some people he recognized, or the Buddha recognized, have self-contempt, have low self-esteem, have insecurity, have a feeling of discouragement. And so he says, so one reason for explaining Buddha nature is for those people. And so what he's saying is, if you yourself, which all may sometimes, I certainly do, feel discouraged or feel, can you do that? Or is it possible? Or, can I make a difference? Or can I achieve that? Or can I, then he's saying, then contemplate this teaching. That's what this is for. Contemplate that you have Buddha nature, that you yourself have it. And it will help you have confidence. It will help you it will help you overcome, and if you're feeling self-contempt, right? Like, oh, you feel like really down about yourself. Then he's saying, then stop focusing on those aspects of yourself and focus on your Buddha nature, right? Like, because you're over-identifying with a mistake you made, for example, or with some limitation. And that's an over-identification. So, admit that you made a mistake is good. That's a good thing. That's true. But not to identify with that mistake, right? If you start identifying with it, you need to let it go and focus on the fact that you have infinite potential, that you have infinite space, that you have infinite capacity for love within you. So that's one of the, so if you feel discouraged, if you feel self-contempt, if you feel insecure, if you feel unconfident, contemplate this teaching, let go of your identification with those faults, recognize they're adventitious like clouds passing through the sky, let them go, and focus on the sky, which is or focus on the jewels, or focus on the statue, whatever, all these different similes, right? Focus on that's what's inside you. All the other stuff is just what's obscuring it. It's not who you are. And let it go. And also the bodhicitta part, that if you're trying to cultivate bodhicitta, right, and then you feel one of the obstacles to actually cultivate bodhicitta is if you start to feel, oh, I can't do it. Could I become a Buddha? Could I become fully enlightened? Could I be like those great, and I remember that when the Dalai Lama won the Nobel Peace Prize, he said anybody can do this. It's no big deal. Uh, you know, because that's his view, right? That's Buddhist view. Everybody has Buddha nature. Everybody can do anything. If they set their mind to it and they take enough time, and if it's not in this lifetime, it'll be in another lifetime, but you can do it. So that's one reason. Then he says the second reason is some, by generating bodhicitta, proclaim, I am the supreme bodhisattva, and they look down on others who have not generated bodhicitta. So there he's getting at, I wouldn't call it in the previous page, looking down on others, kind of arrogance or kind of pride or something. Arrogance, I think, is a good word. Contempt for inferiors or arrogance or looking down on others. And so there, if you for beings who start to feel like they're somehow better than others, he's saying, well, then contemplate, wait a second, the first one was contemplate you have Buddha nature. If you're feeling self-contempt, contemplate that you have Buddha nature. If you're feeling contempt for or better than other people, contemplate that they have Buddha nature, right? And then you recognize, even an insect has Buddha nature, even all beings have Buddha nature. The person who I'm mad at has Buddha nature. The person who I'm disappointed in has Buddha nature. And then you start to realize that we're all equal. That's one point. That we're all the same. That we're all equal. That you're not better than anybody. And that if temporarily you're doing better than somebody else, according to in regards to your Buddha nature, then it's just because you had the good fortune of the Buddha's helping you. It's not that you're somehow intrinsically better. So be grateful, not arrogant. Is the idea. And then there are two other points I'll make here. Another one is and also like in this regard, they often say, because judging others also is considered. The Buddha actually had a famous teaching where he said, he said, if you're not, because they say the Buddha's omniscient, he basically said, if you're not omniscient, don't judge others because you don't know. And then he said, you don't know what somebody else is internally. Their behavior doesn't prove something. And he said, so don't assume you know something you don't know. And then he said, because he gave this metaphor, he said, doing so can be like, sometimes after a fire is burned out, like it looks like there's just ash, but the coals are still red underneath. And he's kind of said, judging others is like walking on that ash. You don't know what's under there. It could be just ash, or it could be fire still burning, coals still red hot to burn your feet. So don't walk there. Don't bother judging others. It's not a useful endeavor. And it doesn't help you. It can harm you yourself, because they could be a bodhisattva you're judging, for example, and then you're way off track. And then the next ones, then he says, I'll just read the verses. Then it says, in the minds of those who do not see the basic element, knowledge of reality does not arise. Therefore, clinging to the incorrect, they do not realize the perfect reality. And then I'll just read the whole thing. Because of being formed and adventitious, the faults of sentient beings are not real. The perfect qualities of the basic element are pure in their nature because of the faults are selfless. Those who cling to unreal faults and who deprecate true qualities do not attain the love that sees themselves and all beings as equal. So that's getting at the last three. One of which is apprehension of the unreal. So it's apprehension of the unreal, deprecating the real, and self-cherishing. Those are the last three. So so the third one was apprehension of the unreal. So that one is referring to when you are grasping at inherent existence, right? That's an apprehension of the unreal. So you're grasping at things as if they inherently exist when they don't, right? And so what he's saying is, by studying Buddha nature, you by studying Buddha nature and the way he taught it here, you develop a capacity for overcoming the mental afflictions. That's okay. You can develop a capacity for overcoming the grasping at that self, right? And by seeing the basic element, you overcome self-grasping or apprehension of the unreal. And so apprehension of the unreal, by the way, is reification, or that's reification or adding something that isn't there. So that's where you're, particularly grasping at a self where there's no self. And then the next one where it says deprecating or disparaging the truth, that's nihilism. That's referring that helps overcome nihilism also. And nihilism is where you deprecate, right? Or something that does exist, like karma, or the capacity for enlightenment, or the existence of a Buddha. When you deprecate those, you're falling into the fault of nihilism. And the teaching on Buddha nature helps beings to overcome that fault by developing a kind of enthusiasm for understanding that that although things are empty, they function. That's why Buddhas can have qualities and activities, among the Vajra topics, right? And enlightenment arises due to causes and conditions. The causes for enlightenment lead to enlightenment. So it helps you to respect causal efficacy and respect what does exist without deprecating it and not fall into nihilism, which is said to be the worst fault, actually worse than falling into nihilism is said to be worse than grasping at true existence. Because if you grasp at true existence, at least you still can respect karma. Right? That's the idea. Whereas if you disparage, if you say nothing exists at all, if you misunderstand emptiness, that Nagarjuna, whose name meant, his first part of his name is Naga, which means serpent, and he used this metaphor. He said, grasping at a kind of a divine serpent or something. But he used this metaphor once where he said, emptiness wrongly understood is like, I guess in India it would be a cobra, or here would be a rattlesnake. But he said it's like, or a cobra. What do you call these other ones here? Copperheads, yeah, too. But it'd be like grasping a snake with your hand at the wrong end. So if you grab like the middle of a snake, it's going to turn and bite you. And he says, understanding emptiness by way of nihilism is like grabbing a snake at the wrong part and being bit. It'll harm you. And he says, so you have to, if you're going to grab a snake, you grab it at the right at the top, right below the head is the metaphor. But he's saying you have to understand emptiness right at the right point. It's a simile or metaphor for understand emptiness right at the right point. If you understand it wrongly, then you deprecate karma and then you go do bad things, harm others, harm yourself, and that's no good. That's worse than not understanding emptiness at all, because it's a misunderstanding that leads to a kind of, in this life and also in future lives, leads to kind of an openness to evil, actually, doesn't it? If you think. Nihilism is like denying that when things do exist, denying that they exist. So saying nothing exists, or saying that even the things that do exist don't exist. That's nihilism. Like, so like an example of nihilism is saying there's no such thing as cause and effect. There's no such thing as karma. There's no such thing as enlightenment. There's no such thing as, yeah, all that. And then the last purpose for teaching, that's listed here, the last of these purposes of teaching, it was self-cherishing. And in brief, self-cherishing is the main hindrance to developing bodhicitta. And sometimes they call it self-cherishing. I don't know. I think it's kind of hard to get at. What it's actually being gotten at is, I sometimes think of it as self-preoccupation. So what it's actually getting at is kind of an over-focus on oneself. And an over-focus on one's own. Like it's let me say it right. It's like a denial. It's not recognizing that your happiness and others' happiness are interdependent. It's not recognizing that others' happiness and your happiness are of equal value. That you and anybody else have equal right to happiness, that the happiness of yourself and the happiness of anybody else are equally important. And as Lama Zorbashe often used to point out, then he would say, and by the way, he would say your happiness, logically, your happiness and the happiness of the person next to you, or any random person, are equal value. And then he would point out, he would say, but others are numberless. And he would say, so if you're going to be democratic, the happiness of the most beings is what matters. So he says, when you make a decision in daily life, the way to make it is to ask, what will lead to the greatest well-being for the largest possible number? And then he said, if you have options of good things to do, then you ask, well, what will help the most beings? What will make the most beings benefit, truly benefit? And that's the right way to make a decision. Self-cherishing only asks the question, what will help me? That's what self-cherishing. Self-cherishing is where you approach each decision in your life asking, only the main question is what will help me, and sometimes you might ask like what will help this person because that will help me. So like, but it still comes back. Every
To
decision
you.
comes back to you. That's what self-cherishing is. Um, um, and that is that kind of self preoccupation or self-centered. I sometimes like translate self-centeredness is a good way, I think. That kind of self-centeredness is the main obstacle to practicing bodhicitta. Right? You can't. It's the main like. It's like that and bodhicitta are like the opposite sides of a magnet. They repel each other. So it's the main obstacle. You have to overcome that kind of self-centeredness if you want to develop even bodhicitta at all. So this teaching helps us develop that. So then he says, so that does not attain the love that sees themselves and all beings as equal, right? When you recognize all of us have Buddha nature equally, then you can develop a kind of equal love for all beings, right? And that's the purpose of this teaching in part. So then he says, upon hearing it in this way, one generates enthusiasm, the same respect for others as for the Buddhas. Isn't that beautiful, by the way? Right. So he says, if you hear this teaching, right, then one point is he says you develop a kind of enthusiasm, um, an energy, a joy, a wanting to, like enthusiasm meaning like a joy to want to practice. That's a great thing, right? And I often think that's, enthusiasm is connected to joyful effort, right? Which is this kind of sense of joy and making effort in this because it's what's wonderful. Right? Then he says the same respect for others is for the Buddhas, and that's often an emphasis, right? Actually, it's one is because all beings are future Buddhas, right? Is one point, but the other is actually, there's a famous teaching by Nagarjuna where he says praise for um, benefiting sentient beings or something like that. I can't remember the exact translation of the title, something like that. But where he makes a point also, he says all the Buddhas, first of all, the Buddhas don't need anything. And all the Buddhas feel is compassion and love for sentient beings. And he says, so if you want to make offerings to the Buddhas, help others. Right? If you want to please the Buddhas, please them. The best way to sort of make the Buddhas happy is to make sentient beings well. And this helps us understand that, right? This teaching helps us to understand that, if you so like the most important offering to the Buddha is to offer to sentient beings, actually. Um, and then it says also, and by hearing this teaching, also you develop wisdom, right? And part of that is you develop this kind of curiosity, right? Which is that seed, right? It's like that's how it starts, right? You develop a seed. Well, I want to understand this emptiness. If emptiness is the ultimate nature of my own mind, if that's the hidden treasure, right? Hidden within, if that's the source of wealth, if that's the source of well-being, if that's what is that? And you start getting curious and you think about it and you ask questions and you study and you contemplate and you meditate. And that's the way to, this teaching leads to wisdom, right? Which is why, by the way, at the beginning, right? That's why from the last chapter, it's more valuable even than generosity. It's more valuable even, generosity is very valuable, good thing. Morality is very wonderful. Meditative concentration is very wonderful, but wisdom, this kind of teaching is more important because it sets the seed for wisdom, which leads to exalted wisdom. And it's also the source of great love, which we already explained, right? Great love that cherishes others equally, all beings. Actually, so we'll finish the chapter. So then it says, through generating these 5 qualities of lack of self-contempt, a view of equality, lack of faults, being endowed with qualities, and love arising from the equality of oneself and sentient beings, one swiftly attains Buddhahood. So, why did he teach this teaching? So that you yourself can achieve Buddhahood is the answer in the end, right? You'll develop these various good qualities by studying this teaching and by developing those good qualities. Then you yourself will achieve Buddhahood. So the Buddha taught the Tathagatagarbha Sutras. Maitreya wrote the Tara Tantra, taught it to a Sangha, to benefit you, actually, right, is the idea. Because then you would develop these good qualities, and therefore you'll enter the path and you'll uncover your Buddha nature. And I just want to go back to just for a moment so going back to that meta, right? And all those similes, right? It said, there's the golden statue hidden within the rags or something, all these different meta similes. But one is inside a lotus, another was inside tattered rags. There were different. similes, but in all of them, right, there was that element. And when he told the story of like somebody points out, right? Somebody points out to a person, oh, inside those rags, there's something very valuable. You should unwrap it. And at the conclusion of this chapter, what he's getting at, I think, is he's the person pointing it out. Each of us is the person who was the passerby who now heard, oh wow, that's where the golden valuable jewel, whatever thing is. And so, and actually when you heard that, if you imagine that passerby hearing that, they would say like, they would just go, oh really? Oh, that's it. Like if you imagine like the person's poor and traveling and somebody says, oh, right there is this huge cachet of jewels, person wouldn't say, "Oh, well, yeah, that's cool." Here, look at my iPhone. Like, they would say, "Wow, let's check it out." And he's saying, "Be like that," right? Where he's saying, develop enthusiasm, uh, develop enthusiasm for unwrapping it, for uncovering it, for digging it up, for whichever those symbols you want to use, um, because it really has great value. Is what Maitreya is saying here. So, okay, so that actually, well, that concludes the chapter, but it is good to have the class. So there's one more class scheduled. What I want to do in that class, because it's quite beautiful actually, is I mentioned this before. I already was preparing for it, but so I wasn't sure how far we get today. But when Kensei Rinpoche taught, well, he taught longer, but he did a beautiful kind of summary of the other Vajra points and the other chapter. So I want to do. We covered the first 4 of the 7 Vajra topics. So there are still 3 Vajra topics, right? The Vajra topic of enlightenment, Bodhi, Zhangchu in Tibetan, but Bodhi. Then the Vajra topic of the qualities of enlightenment or of enlightened being, and then the qualities of the activities of an enlightened being. And I just thought it'd be good to do like one class, the final one, where we're not going to cover the actual. I want to be clear, I'm not going to cover the actual verses because that'd be impossible. They're whole chapters, but just to go over a kind of a summary of like because those are listed like they're enlightenment is listed as 8 qualities, and there are like 64 qualities. 64 points of the so there are 8 points for enlightenment, and the qualities, and the qualities are 64, and then the activities are 32, I think. I'm not going to go into detail and sort of we have this. Yeah, they are all with 30. Yeah, divisible by 8. So we're not going to cover like them in great detail, but I want to kind of go over them briefly because I think they're quite beautiful and inspiring. So next class, which is already scheduled, we'll do that.
It's the 17th.
17th, is it okay?
Yeah.
Jan said it's the 17th of August. So we'll do a summary of the other 3 Vajra topics then, answer a few questions. John, I know you had 1, 2, and if other people have questions, we'll sort of save some time for questions in that class. Yep. Oh, good question. So like the text for the other chapters of the Uttara Tantra. I have a few different translations of it, but I'll if I have your email, like I have an email list, right? If people who haven't, if you're not on my email list, send me your email, and I'll send like a link or something with a few resources. And so I'm sure that I have books of them, but I'm sure there's an online translation too. I'm certain it must be because it's been translated many times. The Uttara Tantra, many different. I can think of 5 or 6 translations of the root text at least. So yeah, I can send some links if people want to read them. Because it's a beautiful text. The whole text is quite beautiful, and there's a harmony to it. You've seen that. I mean, you said it at the beginning, right? That the 3 jewels of the result, the Buddha nature is the main thing that allowed the cause, or the thing that allows you to achieve enlightenment. But then it's somebody else's, right? Enlightenment qualities and activities that that allow you to awaken your Buddha nature, right? So like, how does your Buddha nature awaken? It's by relating to somebody else's activities in particular, but their activities come from their qualities. That's your guru, that's the Buddha. Yeah,
Right.
that's the guru, and that's the Buddha. Yeah, so that whereas you have a Buddha nature, but you have to interact with somebody else who's already achieved it. And they said, and Shakyamuni Buddha activated his Buddha nature because of previous Buddhas, and Tara activated hers because of previous Buddhas, and so on. So it's the way it rolls on through through time. But so that's the plan with that, and then then we already said, and then I mentioned just so people know that, and then I'll schedule now So we've got already the last class scheduled, and soon I'll schedule a White Tara practice, which that one I think will be hybrid. So we'll do a guided meditation on White Tara because Gabriel asked. I mentioned the idea that when Ling Rinpoche gave the empowerment, and April said that would be good. So I came back and said that. So we'll do that, and then I'm going to organize a couple of events like of prayers, practices for the nation. Seems like a good time for that. So I'm thinking for that I might do like one in person and one online, separate. So because I think it'd be hard to do actual read a practice in person while doing it online. So I'm thinking I'll do one, and maybe if it's possible I could do one here and then one. I don't know if I could do it online though with the Zoom. We'll figure it out. And then we'll do another basic program class. It sounds like some people are interested. And again, email Jan if you have thoughts about which of those 3 topics we'll do, and then we'll do the dedication. So the supreme jewel bodhicitta, where it has not arisen, may it arise and grow. Where it has arisen, may it not decrease, but increase more and more. In this snowy mountain paradise, you the source of good and happiness, all powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until samsara ends. I dedicate all these mirrors, which are merely labeled, totally empty from their own sides, that the I, who is merely labeled, totally empty from its own side, may achieve Buddha's enlightenment, which is merely labeled, totally empty from its own side, in order to lead all sentient beings who are merely labeled, totally empty from their own side, to the state of enlightenment as quickly as possible. And then, strictly through, just finish that chapter. So through studying the first chapter of the Tara Tantra, may each of us, who studied it together, or even heard one word, be able to actualize all the qualities that Maitreya listed there. Like great enthusiasm, all the different kinds, wisdom, and great love, and so on. May we be able to actualize all of those qualities as quickly as possible in order to be of benefit to others and to ourselves as well. Thanks. Thanks, everyone. Good to see you.
Thank you, Lauren.
Well, thank you.
How come none of us did
Thank
not
you
talk
so
about the tantric initiations kept on?
Well, hold on one second. Let me just stop recording. Stop